Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening and welcome again to Conversations Across Time. Tonight, as always, seated to my left is my co-host, Babette Josephs, former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Josephs.
Thank you.
Welcome, Babette. Thank you. Seated to my right is noted Russian author and the father of psychology, once again, Fyodor Dostoevsky. Thank you. Thank you for staying.
Good to be back.
Seated next to Mr. Dostoevsky is former Secretary of State, Mr. John Foster Dulles. Welcome, Secretary Dulles.
Thank you.
Seated next to Secretary Dulles is Sharif Hussein bin Ali. And to put this in perspective in terms of who the Sharif is, he was the character in David Lean's film Hussein bin Ali, for which Mr. Omar Sharif was nominated for an Oscar.
Yes, he did not win the Oscar. He was not awarded the Oscar.
Well, but he was awarded the Golden Globe, but he did not win the Oscar.
Yeah. History has an inescapable pull on every aspect of a culture, even a culture as opposed to living in the past, at least in principle, as this American Western culture is still bound by its history and by its past. That's true. So just as Omar Sharif, despite his agreed upon brilliant acting performance in Lawrence of Arabia, he did not win the nomination. That hasn't changed too much. If you I don't know if your viewers are following the nominations for the Academy Awards, but not much has changed. The nominees this year were still all white. Interesting choice, the way that the American cinema production system works. So few nominations for people who are not white, telling white stories. They will tell a non-white story by a white person and nominate the white person for portraying someone of color, but not someone who is brown.
Not someone of color playing someone of color. Is that what you're saying?
That does seem to be the way. Was Elizabeth Taylor nominated for an Academy Award for playing Cleopatra?
Yes.
She was. Did Cleopatra have blue eyes?
Unlikely.
Seems unlikely.
Unlikely. As a matter of fact, she was African. I always think of the Egyptians as being brown-skinned. They're Africans.
Yes, and then more recently in American cinema, what was that movie? Kings of Egypt. Was that the title, featuring a white cast?
Well, Charlton Heston has certainly played roles that were, in fact, the actual person was certainly brown, not white.
So you're saying that not a lot has changed in the United States of America?
There is the social media, the Twitter.
Yes.
You know this. You know
Yes.
this, right? There's on the Twitter they have the hashtags, and they connect these ideas that people have. They make the tweets about anything but then they put the hashtag to put them, organize them together. There's a hashtag even for this thing that we're talking about. It's called Oscars So White. This is good,
That's
no?
great.
This is great, and
Oscars, what very white. The user Rain of April. I do not know her name, but I know her username is Rain of April. Yes.
And, well, you bring up an interesting point, because right now, there are several films, and the Oscar nominations have recently come out, and
Very white.
very
Very
white, and the fact that Will Smith, a very fine actor, was overlooked for his,
He is good. Very handsome as well.
and he
Not
was,
as handsome as you are.
Perhaps equally handsome.
Oh, okay.
but overlooked for the role that he played when he talked about the NFL and the way that the players are abused. So that's interesting that you would mention that.
NFL football players are like so many toy soldiers.
Ah, when you say toy soldiers, in that they are used by,
Expound, please.
yes,
Well, they are men. They are human beings, of course. But the way that they are treated by their employers,
their owners, the NFL owners.
Who care
Yes.
only about the bottom line.
they are treated like toy soldiers. Like little boys fighting with them, making explosion noises as they die or are crippled unceremoniously.
Yes. I
So sports, the film industry, in the past, bound to racism in this country. Is that what you're, I mean, I'm willing to believe that. I
It's-
see it all the time.
These things are all inseparable. We all know that the specific is always connected to the universal. It's the same reason that in the current climate of U.S. political landscape, there's a strong push for some people to say that they want universal health care. Universal. But the way that you convince people of the universal health care is not by saying that everyone should have it. Everyone agrees that people should have health care. Everyone agrees that it should happen. But how do you convince people is that you show people someone who does not have it. Does it work? I don't know. Do you think it would work? To convince people. So showing one person, is that enough? It doesn't seem to be enough.
The Sheik makes a very good point in that you can understand the culture, and when you understand the culture, you can understand the foreign policy by looking at the arts and the literature of that culture.
And the pastimes like
Right,
sports.
the sports
professional
also,
sports,
the arts,
whatever.
literature, leisure time activity. And basically what the Sheik is saying, that the culture of the United States hasn't changed that much from when Mr. Dulles was Secretary of State, and the attitudes towards people of color have not changed that much. And it's reflected not only in the arts and the awards that are given out, but also in foreign policy and how we look at other
And
people
in
in the
income
world.
disparity.
I
And
would
the
love
income
to know.
disparity as well. So, Mr. Dulles, what do you think about the fact that the Oscar nominees are all white this year?
I don't interest myself in such trivial nonsense as motion pictures,
So
so
you don't think it reflects the views of society that you help to propagate?
if it's been like this forever, then why do you even bother trying to ameliorate it?
Because
It
we want
is
to make
what
the
it
world
is.
a better, our own better place.
It's always
Well-
been like this from time immemorial, and I don't see how it's going to change.
I have a question. I have a question that you might like.
Well, try me, sir.
Since you do not like sports, I understand it is quite frivolous.
It is.
what do you think, we'll ask about politics, what do you think are the important differences? Are there any important differences between an old political opponent of yours, George McGovern, and this new American candidate, Bernie Sanders?
Same, cut from the same cloth, a bunch of silly 60s radicals propagating some warmed over communist nonsense.
But surely there must be differences between them.
None whatsoever worth the mention.
So is it communist to mention or to be concerned that in this country the middle class is disappearing and people are becoming poorer and poorer?
I'm not
it's-
responsible for that, madam, how they
I
conduct
just
their...
asked you whether you should be concerned.
I am not concerned, I don't have to be concerned, that is not my forte.
May I ask the Sheikh, you were promised a caliphate, which was a huge portion. You can tell the audience, because I really don't know myself exactly how big that was and where that was. And in order to gain that, you helped the Western powers defeat the Germans in the World War I, but you never got that. So what was your vision? How you were a Sunni and you were able to bring the Sunnis and the Shiites together. Who else could you have brought together? What was your vision for that caliphate?
My vision for the caliphate, 40 million acres and several mules.
And for
So
those in our audience,
very basic.
those in our audience, that reference goes to what the freed slaves were promised during the Reconstruction era, and that was 40 acres and a mule. So that's the 40 million acres and a mule.
Several.
So,
What you're saying is that everybody would have an opportunity to move forward under your rule, that everybody would get something that could make him or her, I understand they is now used as a singular, everybody would get something that would make them self-sufficient? Or move them in that direction?
The English language is quite cumbersome.
Yes.
But yes, presumably, everyone would have more opportunity for prosperity than under British colonial rule.
Where we're not interested in in prosperity for your cow. So what else would you see?
Different from the rule of the British?
How would you have done it?
How would I have done what exactly?
Run that part of the Middle East if you had been not thrown to the curb by the Western, and they had actually given you this caliphate that they promised to give you.
what might the Middle East look like today?
What might the Middle East look like today if the caliphate promise had been honored?
Yes.
That is the question. I say that the Middle East would be far more wealthy and less white.
Would there be so many conflicts between different factions?
There are always conflicts whenever there are
Would you be able
factions.
to resolve them better?
Resolve. We're asking the wrong questions.
Hussein bin Ali. And Hussein bin Ali is a direct descendant of the Prophet, or was a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He was named to honor Hussein ibn Ali by his father Ali Pasha ibn Muhammad. it was Ali Pasha's belief that it was his son's destiny to reunite the conflicts plaguing Islam as a result of the Sunni and Shia division. Ali Pasha was a high-ranking official within the Ottoman Empire. And on your screen, you'll see the extension of the Ottoman Empire. But officials, the Ottoman officials, while they gave Ali Pasha, which would have been Hussein bin Ali's dad, while they gave him a title and gave him jurisdiction over Mecca, which was a city, they did that because within the Muslim community, he was recognized as a leader, but the Ottomans didn't want to recognize him as a descendant of Muhammad. But he was named, Hussein bin Ali lived from the years 1853 to 1931. And as I said, he was named to honor the 7th century Caliph Hussein ibn Ali, who lived 626 to 6.
So he could have been a caliph.
He could have been a caliph. That's exactly right.
Because he had all the hereditary background.
He did.
Exactly.
He did. And Hussein bin Ali was the son of the 4th Caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he was, this is interesting when you heard me talk about the Sunni and the Shia. This is interesting because he was a Sunni and he was the first imam of Shia Islam. He united the two. He was so revered that he formed the Shia sect of the Islamic faith.
Self-determination is the right of every population. Self-sufficiency is also a goal.
Now,
But peace is not some abstract ideal to be achieved. We can't be certain that it's even possible, but self-determination is a realistic and possible, achievable goal.
and that seems to be one of the things, the overriding theme whenever we have Secretary Dulles here, when we talk about self-determination. And certainly I would think Mr. Dostoevsky could speak to the fact that Mother Russia has always been pursuing the rights of self-determination, and even in today's world, that's viewed with an antagonism by the United States. So,
But like all nations, there's not the morality as the Sheikh is talking about self-determination as a moral thing that people have the right to govern themselves. The self-determination proposed by even my glorious mother Russia, and certainly by the United States, Britain, and France, is self-determination in their own self-interest. So when Russia's policy in the Balkans was self-determination for the Serbs and the Czechs, it was to keep the Austro-Hungarian Empire in turmoil and to have weak countries bordering on Russia. So it wasn't that we were in love with the morality that the Sheikh was pointing out. We were in love with weak countries on our border, which would enable us to fulfill our foreign policy goals of warm water. When the United States talked about self-determination after World War I, President Wilson, put it on a high moral ground, but it was our way to get into the Middle East and start to exploit
natural resources.
the natural
Well, to do
resources.
almost the same thing. We have a whole bunch of states that are now weak in some ways, fighting with each other while we take their resources.
Right, so from my point of view as a moralist, is that the only answer to world peace, to settle these problems, and with all due respect to my Muslim friend here, is to go back to the old Christianity, not Western Christianity, but the old Christianity as portrayed by Mother Russian and our Eastern Orthodox beliefs.
Well,
And if we go back to the teachings of Jesus, and his goals of peace, we maybe will be able to achieve it.
May I ask, sir, Mr. Dostoevsky, how is your nation's imperialism, and it is true, after the Second World War has acquired dominance over every nation from East Germany, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Baltic states, and you have to remember that. And I inquired, Mr. Dostoevsky, and all the leftists within my voice, how is Russia's imperialism compared to American, quote-unquote, imperialism?
Imperialism and self-determination exists when it's in the self-interest of the country, when it's in the self-interest to have self-determination. So when it was in Mother Russia's self-interest to have weaken the Austro-Hungarian Empire and have Baltic nationalism, self-determination on the part of the Serbs and the Czechs, we favored that. When it was to our self-interest to control those countries, then we abandoned self-determination, just like the United States did.
The
Now,
prophet,
I'm sorry.
the prophet Isa, who in Christianity is called Jesus Christ, was a great prophet. But what you are describing as your country's history of imperialism doesn't particularly sound to me in line with the teachings of the great prophet Isa. So I don't understand how you can say that Russia is the paragon of morality in following Isa's teachings.
Because the Western Christian countries would not leave us alone, and we had to resort to that. If we had been given access early on and we had not been surrounded by hostile people that wanted to subjugate us,
As you were subjugating other ethnic nations within your own borders.
well, we only learned from you and the British and the French.
I'm sure you
Because
might have
we
picked up
certainly-
those, sir.
we
I'm
certainly
sure,
were-
I'm
we-
sure you might have picked up those lessons on your own, and you have.
Well, historically, you guys were much more imperialistic and invasive than we were until much later in our history, so we did learn from you.
I want to, if we can talk for a moment about what is currently going on as between Iran and Saudi Arabia. As you know, there has been an agreement reached, a normalization, somewhat stabilization of relations between Iran and the United States. And in December of 2015, there was the execution of a cleric, a well-known cleric, who was Shia living in Saudi Arabia. I want to quote from the Ayatollah Khomeini, and just get your reaction to this, Sheikh. This is the quote: "Doubtlessly, unfairly spilled blood of oppressed martyrs, Sheikh Namir will affect rapidly, and divine revenge will seize Saudi politicians." Now, there's a very precarious relationship that's going on, and I'd like your response to the Ayatollah Khomeini's statement.
What precarious relationship are you referring to?
Well, I was referring to the fact that Iran and the United States have of late been trying to establish better relations. And do you see that the execution of the cleric by the Saudis as something that might disturb that?
I don't think that one execution can derail the conciliation process between these two great nations and great powers, but it is clear to me that the Saudi state is not prioritizing the peacemaking process. The Saudi family, the Saud family, is still protecting the interests of its own nation and its own purse. Seems rather straightforward.
The fact that the Sheikh Namir was actually speaking out as a voice of dissent in Saudi Arabia,
Which we should say is Sunni, and the Sheikh is a Shia, so
Yes.
we have that conflict.
And also it's Arab, where Iran is Persian, so you have the
There's a
religious
sort of ethnic-
ethnic differences.
Yes, and Iran is primarily Shia. It's a Shia majority in Iran. I just, I wonder, do you see anything lurking there? And let me go further with another quote from the Ayatollah. This oppressed scholar had neither invited people to armed movement, nor was he involved in any covert plots. The only act of Sheikh Namir was outspoken criticism, and he promoted virtue and prohibited vice, which was due to his religious zeal.
Very pious man. Very, very pious, very dedicated to bringing to fruition his vision for the followers of the faith.
Or perhaps merely an agent of a foreign power. You can't count on this propaganda.
Who was exercising what we would think of as his First Amendment rights. He was speaking out.
So much subversion could come under the heading of freedom of the press or whatever.
So you would suppress that
If
possible.
if possible, yes. I mean, it is necessary.
Well, he did. He was part of an administration that watched McCarthyism go on, so he certainly suppressed it.
Yes.
Yes, the false idea of liberalism, equality. I mean, that's been proven to be total nonsense. I mean, the public is totally, the so-called great general American public, they rather pay attention to this Oscars nonsense rather than serious politics. And,
So you don't-
and therefore, they have to, not only do we exclude them from discussions of foreign policy, but they exclude themselves.
So you don't believe that culture, arts, literature, sports, social media, film reflects the attitudes and mores of a culture, Mr. Dulles?
It's rather beyond their comprehension, and
But it's
So much
beyond your
education.
comprehension. I guess so.
I am of a class, I represent the class that truly appreciates education.
Ah.
For the upper class, I'm sure.
If you want to call it that, yes.
But anyway, we don't want to continually
Yeah.
jump on you because
Because we appreciate how clear you are about your view and your world vision.
exactly. But don't forget that in a couple of shows ago that we talked about literature, and of course my work does reflect a lot about Russian culture at the time, and I do advocate some reforms. I wish you would read it, and you might broaden your horizons.
I'll get to it someday.
Well, I, as part of the fabric of this country, at least what we are told, is that there should always be the opportunity for one speaking out in dissent. Dissent's a major part of our culture, and I am saddened by the execution of Namir al-Nimr just because he was a voice of dissent. Whether one agrees with him or not, or agreed with him or not, it just seems that the Saudis have pushed the world into a very precarious situation by carrying out this execution. And at the timing of it is so significant because it threatens the fragile understanding that exists in the Middle East in terms of Iran finally coming to the table and being a partner that the United States can reason with. And we haven't been able to do that since 1979, when in fact the Shah of Iran was deposed.
Our ally, the Shah of Iran.
Well, our puppet.
Yes. I don't know that we could consider the Shah of Iran necessarily our
They
ally.
hated him so much in Iran. They just hated him so much.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across across time, conversations 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 across time.